things like that. So there's limits on what capacity that site can handle.
Have you ever been on North Washington Avenue after an event at Marywood University?
I have.
And would you please tell me what you've seen?
I've seen traffic that's associated with any type of event that goes on across the state.
Backed up for blocks?
That you're speculating.
So you haven't seen that?
I have not seen that, no.
Okay. Now, you also said that a lot of the information you're basing your opinions on is because you feel people will ride bikes. Is that accurate?
That's not what I stated.
Oh, repeat yourself, please.
I stated that we did not account for intermodal split, which is definitely something that can be accounted for in a use like this.
But
That's
you
what I
didn't
stated.
account. You
We
did
did not account for that in our total
Okay. And
generation rates.
And because people will also use Ubers.
They can.
Yeah.
That's what modal split is. If you know traffic engineering, you're allowed to get a credit for multimodal split.
And then most people are, you said you don't think some people will even have cars, so.
There's a possibility that people will not have cars.
And that's part of how these numbers came about.
That is not. If you heard me, that is not how these numbers, that's not included in this at all. I was just making a statement that we did not include those in these generation numbers.
Did this report come from a previous report that was submitted in this? Because it looked awfully familiar.
I'm not sure what was previously submitted.
We had a previous traffic study report that was given to us by Attorney Pat Lavelle, and actually this one looks like it's almost the same thing with maybe your name on top of it. Was anything taken from a prior study?
No, I generated this study myself. I don't know what you're referring to.
There was an earlier version, but it was...
There may have been an earlier version.
Oh, there was an earlier version, but what?
It's the same, our engineering firm.
Okay, so this one is an updated one.
Yes.
Okay.
You don't have to go like this. It's an updated report.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you so much.
I just have a couple of questions, if I may.
Sure.
Just to make sure I understood you, because I haven't had time to obviously review the full report. Are there, you said there are 24 vehicles, approximately 24 vehicles added is how you calculated of what would actually be on the road?
So, yes, the
On a daily
combined
basis.
site,
Okay.
so Scranton and Dunmore, all the uses together will result in 48 additional trips in the morning peak, 55 in the evening. So trips is entering and exiting. So if you take half of that, a vehicle would be 24 and 28.
Okay, now, if I'm to understand correctly, there's 69 apartments, so 2/3 of the residents aren't going in and out? Is that how this, is that what this is saying to me?
69 apartments was used in the generation of the numbers.
Right, so
Actually,
69
79, because we included 10 for the bed and breakfast.
For the bed and breakfast, okay, so
Yeah.
79 apartments and the bed and breakfast. So that's actually more than 2/3. So more than 2/3 of the residents aren't going anywhere? Is that?
So actually, for the combined trips for multifamily, which is the residential, you're looking at a total of 28 total morning peak and 35 evening peak.
Okay.
Now, that's the peak period. That's not all day long. All day long, you're looking at a daily trips of 430. So you have to remember what we're talking about here. And typically, when you look at traffic generation and these types of projects, and actually all types of development projects, you're looking at the peak periods, because that's where the, the highest volume of traffic on your roadway network is.
All right, and obviously you lived here. I just want to make sure, for the record, that you know that there's 3 schools nearby with pedestrian traffic.
Correct.
And there's a marathon and half marathon that not only runs through that area, but also the barrier breakers and other running groups run through that area.
I do not know that, but in terms of, again, traffic studies and traffic generation, you do not look at specific events such as that are once a year. You cannot design a site or design your traffic mitigation for something that may or may not happen throughout the year.
Okay, so the training of the marathon runners is not calculated into this? And the
I have no idea what you're talking about, the training of a marathon runner. That would never be calculated.
Where's the nearest bus stop?
The nearest, I do not know.
I don't know either. I was just wondering if you know.
Yeah. Now, and keep in mind, we have to go through the land development process, where we'll be required to look at things such as the bus stops, pedestrian facilities, things like that. This isn't the be-all, end-all. This is a preliminary assessment to get us to where we need to go.
So, and if those things don't work out, what happens to a typical property? Have you ever seen that where the traffic study has stopped a development and then what happens?
Well, if a traffic study is not, if the traffic can't be adequately mitigated, then it's between the municipality and the developer in terms of the next steps, but that's not where we're at here, and you're speculating to something that could or could not happen.
It's a hypothetical, absolutely.
Yeah, I'm not here to testify on hypothetical, I apologize.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, before you sit down.
Sure.
I think you were at the point.
We can't hear you.
Yes. I think you were quite adamant in your position. When you did your calculations here, you were quite conservative. You didn't take credit for items that you actually could. Is that correct?
Exactly, that's what my point I was trying to make.
Yeah, and could you explain what that means to the board?
Well, again, you look at internalization to these types of sites. So if you have restaurant uses and typical uses that the other uses in the development will patronize, for the most part, as opposed to going out and coming back in, those trips are internal to the site. They're not on the roadway network. All right, so not all the trips associated with, say, the restaurant use would be new trips on the roadway network. Even though our numbers are saying they are, we didn't take any credit for that. If we put together a formal traffic study with, this type of development, we would work with the municipality, the borough, the city, in terms of those types of credits. But right now, we did not take those into account. Similarly with the multimodal split that I was talking about.
Thank you. If I can, I'd like to call my next witness. Mr. Cognetti. I'd rather not give one. I'm going to just call my witness. Yeah, well, I have the right to put on testimony, and that's what I'm going to do.
What, she asked for an offer of proof, she's entitled to an offer of proof.
He's going to testify to what he knows about this particular site with regard to the inquiries that took place with regard to this site, with regard to any of the particular uses that allowed by right in this particular site, and why they did not come to this particular site, because it's cost prohibitive. We've already heard from the engineer that it's going to take between, I guess for one daycare, between $1.5 and $2 million to put a daycare in building number 1. Nobody's coming. This man is the listing broker for it, what he's going to testify to. I'd love to give you the full offer of proof, but it's his testimony, not mine, as to the inquiries and those that came and those that went. And I believe that it's relevant because they go for the particular uses that may or may not be allowed by right in this ordinance. So that's where it's going to go. As to the particulars of his testimony, he gets to put that in because he's the realtor, not me.
I am going to object to this testimony. Based on the offer of proofs. We don't need to know who John toured through that building. That is irrelevant to what's at hand. We don't, and it's going to be hearsay. A lot of it, he's going to tell us certain things about what people said if they can't afford it, or they didn't want it, or why they didn't want it. It absolutely has no bearing on the issue in front of you tonight. It's getting late. There's a lot of people that want public comment here, and this is irrelevant. There's no foundation.
Obviously, this goes to your decision, your determination, and it's an error of law not to allow me to have testimony on the most pertinent point of a variance. So both validity and traditional variance. This goes to it. Every case, every reported case goes to this issue. So I'd ask that the gentleman be allowed to testify.
We'll have a standing objection and let him go. No, your objection stands throughout the testimony, yes.
You please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
John Cognetti, 29 Gracie Drive, Dalton, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Well, if we can, just by way of background, what do you do for a living and how you're related to this particular project?
I've been in commercial real estate for 43 years in northeastern Pennsylvania. It's my background. Education is in architecture and urban design, and I've worked for architectural firms in the past. I'm here tonight because I represent Marywood University. They've engaged our services as a company to market this property and to find, obviously, a buyer for it. Our experience, what we have done is market it literally throughout the universe, throughout the United States and through the country. We have had a total of 190 inquiries into this property, direct inquiries. It's probably been viewed by tons more people than that. We've had several showings on the property, and all of the uses that are allowed in the property, various people have come interested in them. Group homes, medical dental, a cemetery, which is permitted, by the way, college university. I could address that immediately. I'm sorry. As you know, Marywood University acquired the property. They anticipated on converting it for their use. When they acquired it, they engaged an architectural firm specifically that designs campuses and university buildings. They went through an extensive study on the buildings that exist and also the conversion to their uses. The estimate came in at about $25 to $30 million. At the time this was done, if you could recall, higher education was going through somewhat of a change where long-distance learning, off-campus internet was being created. They then decided, Marywood University decided to focus on their campus and built a library, learning commons building that satisfies the need. Hence, this was surplus real estate. They decided to focus on their campus. This was put up on the market for sale. The extensive information that Marywood had engaged engineers and architects to do on the property had been available, is made available to those that are serious about the property. We requested that they sign a confidentiality agreement, so numerous individuals and organizations, developers, and several of the people here, some of the people here tonight, and most of the developers we know and love in this part of the country, they've all been through, engaged, looked at this particular property, okay? Unfortunately, no one has quite stepped forward with an offer that was suitable for what Marywood wanted. So, we had people looking at group homes. We had people looking at mental and dental outpatient facilities. We had spoken to the major hospital institutions in the region. I won't name them. They looked at it. They turned it down. Most of the group homes that looked at the property, it doesn't meet the requirements today because of the age of the buildings, and the adaptive reuse that would have to happen was cost prohibitive. It's cheaper to build new. Community center or library, we all know we have a community center, a cultural center, we have libraries. Marywood has a library. We don't need a library. There's nobody that came forward. Cultural center and museum. From Transylvania, you may know where that is, we received a phone call because someone wanted to put a museum of the occult in those buildings. So the point I'm trying to make is that it was exposed all over the country, all over the world. Daycare center, adult daycare center, child, they're also permitted uses. Daycare operators, with the use of the properties and the layout of the buildings, it's not economically feasible for them to buy the buildings, renovate them, and be able to provide daycare services to the population at affordable prices that our population could afford because of the nature of the real estate. The hospital system, there's no one that approached us for a hospital. Membership club, we talked about that. Country clubs and social clubs, a lot of them are closing. Nursing homes, personal care, again, it's the configuration of the spaces, and also the nursing home permits. We did speak with local developers, local nursing home operators and owners. It does not work because of the buildings, the age of the buildings. Uh-oh, is there a mouse in the room? Okay. Offices, healthcare institutions, college, university, I addressed that. Places of worship, we all know what's happening. Unfortunately, we represent several of the denominations in the region selling off their churches. School, public, private, secondary, we did have a lot of inquiries from private schools. The list goes, none from the local market per se, all over the country, but when they received the information, and our information had all of the studies that were done and the layouts, it does not work or is not economically feasible, and those are the permitted uses in this particular zone. And that's why I think that we are here tonight. So, we also looked at alternative uses, which is what they call a lifelong learning situation. Across the country today, and I'm going to read this and then I'm going to keep quiet. Going back to campus. Overall, the baby boom generation is healthier, more diverse, and better educated than previous generations. By 2020, nearly 54 million Americans will be over 65, according to the Center for Health Workforce Studies. While a recent study revealed that a majority of boomers plan to stay in their homes during retirement, those who are able to move are pursuing enrichment communities that bypass more conventional retirement havens. The reason I bring this up is because we did research studies. There are universities that have next to or close to their campuses housing for this type of population because they interact with the community. We went after those people that do those kind of housing projects to look at this particular property. There are some of this type of living at Penn State and also in Lewisburg at Bucknell. However, unfortunately, none of them except who's here tonight came forward with the concept that's similar to this but not totally like this. With that, anybody have any questions? If not, good night.
No. You could cross-examine. Well, you guys brought up other uses. Why wasn't other uses made? So that opened the door for this. So your objection is now overruled, and now you can cross-examine.
Did I go home?
No, she's going to ask you a question.
Go ahead.
I have one question. In your listing, did you offer to sell them as separate?
Could you pull that a little closer to?
Sure.
Thank you.
In your listing, did you happen to offer them as a separate buildings, or was it all just all 9 or none?
No, because the property is not subdivided. It is one parcel of land. So we offered it as one parcel.
Could you have that option?
I couldn't answer that question. My friend Donnie King over there is a city planner. We'd have to go through subdivision regulations in 2 communities to do all of that. Marywood had said...
So it is feasible, it's possible?
No, I can't answer that question. I don't know, because you have setbacks, you have parking requirements of each building, you have a complex, there are 9 buildings, so 9 parcels. Each one has certain setbacks from property lines.
So are you saying a definitive no, that it's not possible to go through this process and maybe have that option?
Sam, anything's possible with money.
Okay, thank you, that's all.
He gets to answer. We don't cut him off. Finish your answer.
I'm saying anything's possible with money. You probably would have to demolish some of the buildings to get the setback lines that the city of Scranton requires from other property lines, as this panel here tonight knows. Dunmore has the same requirements. You can't build up right to a property line. So there's a lot of work that would have to be done. That's not my job to do it. It's not Marywood University's job to do it. My job was to sell that property as one parcel to a developer or one individual.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to call my next witness, Mr. Thomas Shepstone.
Again, I'm going to ask for an offer of proof, please.
Oh, to be quite detailed, I actually, if I would, he is our a primary witness. He will testify as to all the criteria with regard to special exception and how we meet the special exception. He will also go through each one of the particular elements for the traditional variance, and he is going to go through the elements for the validity variance. He will identify different ordinances that have application and what follows in that. And if I may say so, he's appeared before this board and offered testimony on each and every one of those points, and that's why we're here tonight on those three things. But he's an expert. Oh, yes, I am. If you would, Mr. Shepstone, get sworn or sworn at.
Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
Tom Shepstone, S-H-E-P-S-T-O-N-E. I have an office at 100 4th Street, Honesdale, Pennsylvania.
Thank you.
Why don't you give the board a little bit of your background? I know you've appeared in front of them on, I would say, at least 4 or 5 occasions for me. But
yes,
right ahead.
And prior to you, somebody else. My background is I'm a professional planner. I've been such since 1973. I have written dozens of zoning ordinances in both Pennsylvania and New York. I have worked for numerous private clients in doing development feasibility studies and evaluating properties to determine what is practical to do with those under both natural resource conditions as well as zoning laws and as well as market feasibility. I've also done a great deal of market research for different parties and have represented a number of private developers in securing development approval and helped administer numerous zoning ordinances and subdivision ordinances in both Pennsylvania and New York.
And Mr. Shepstone, you're familiar with this particular property, is that correct?
Yes.
You've been through this particular property?
Yes, I have. Through every building.
And you're familiar with the zoning ordinance of the city of Scranton, would that be correct?
Yes, very much so.
Now, with regard to that, could you please detail, if you would, your observations and your opinions with regard to the criteria for special exception?
Yes, and first of all, I want to point out that this is a special exception, or qualifies in my opinion, because the buildings are non-conforming, several of them in many respects, and also the building number 1 in the city of Scranton included some dormitory use, which is not permitted in the district. So that building is non-conforming to that extent. And your ordinance provides that when you have a non-conforming building or non-conforming use, that you can shift that to another non-conforming use. That is provided for, I believe, in section 445-77G2. And it says a non-conforming use may be changed to a different type of non-conforming use only if permitted as a special exception by the zoning hearing board. And it requires you to look at 6 different specific criteria. The first is traffic generation, and we've heard this evening from the Langen engineering representative that the traffic generation will be relatively minimal. It will be especially minimal when compared to the previous use, and it will amount to, as previously testified, less than 1 vehicle, or about 1 vehicle per minute during the peak hour for the overall project, and half a vehicle or 1 vehicle per every 2 minutes. So the traffic generation, in my view, based on the expert witness you've already heard, as well as my own analysis. I looked at it very roughly myself, and I came to a similar conclusion, and I certainly defer to the witness on that. Noise, dust, fumes, gases, odor, glare, vibration, fire, and explosive hazards. None of those are applicable except for the noise, and I would point out that the city has a noise standard already. This is a standard that this applicant will have to meet, and the activities are going to largely be inside, except for some stuff in the back where the public space will be, and that will be buffered with landscaping. But again, the bottom line is that the activity is such that it will have to meet your own ordinances. And that's the criteria that really counts. Also, I'll just mention glare briefly. We're going to be using light shielding. I'm not sure Jerry mentioned that or not, but there will be, all the lights will be shielded such that they do not direct light onto adjoining properties. And I also note that we have proposed limiting our hours in terms of impacts as well. Outdoor storage is another criteria. There will be no outdoor storage connected with this project. Hours of operation, as I've already indicated, there are some standards which were previously testified to by Hillary. She noted the restaurant would operate from 11 to midnight, 11 a.m. to midnight, the event space from 9 a.m. to midnight, and the coffee bar from 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. The coffee bar is not expected to generate any significant noise or traffic between 7 a.m. and 9 a.m., as most morning patrons are expected to be residents of the projects and will therefore walk over. Compatibility with character of the surrounding area. I think this is really the key criteria, and I think it's the one that we've heard the most questions about, in a sense. You have to understand what this project is. This is a vacant building, long vacant at this point, and it is a collection of buildings, which is a given. These buildings are a given. And that's what makes this property special. It's what makes it difficult to use. It's not like taking a blank sheet of paper and figuring out what the easiest thing to do with it is. We are constrained by what is there, which is very unique. It's very bulky, it's very big, it's very expensive to demolish. I think you heard some testimony earlier about building number 1, that the cost for demolishing that could be $1.5 million, and that was based on an estimate provided by a company that does that. The buildings are deteriorating. When I walked through, I heard some of the things that were discussed about the birds in the building and some broken windows. I didn't hear anybody mention about some of the ceilings falling down, which is true. Quite frankly, on the inside, based on the deterioration which is occurring rather steadily, that building is rather creepy at the moment. Especially the buildings on the Dunmore side, but also the building number 1. This is now an older building. It was designed for something that was quite different than what you would design it for today. You cannot meet the current standards for an educational facility with that building without an extraordinary cost-prohibitive expense, and therefore you have a very difficult situation. So what you have is this property that is on the verge of becoming blight. That's the reality of what you're dealing with here. You've got a property on the verge of becoming blight. So the question is, what do you do with it? Well, you've got to do something that is feasible from both a physical perspective and from an economic perspective. If you look at the Herzog case, and I'm not a lawyer, it's up to this board to decide with the advice of your attorney, but I advise you to look at the Hertzberg case, which specifically says that if you can only convert it to a principal permitted use or permitted use at a cost prohibitive expense, that's essentially the admission that you can't do it. And therefore, it's ruled out. You have no practical use for the property. I would urge you to read that case, discuss it with your attorney, and I think you'll see what I'm talking about. So when we look at this character, we have to consider that in order to prevent the blight, in order to provide some practical use of this property, we've got to find uses that fit the buildings. This isn't a case of deciding, well, we could do this, we could do that. No, we got to find something that works with the buildings. The buildings are there. So that kind of leads into some other things that I think are important to look at here, and that is with respect to character, what your Scranton-Abington's Regional Comprehensive Plan says. It talks about this being an urban neighborhood, and it talks about the fact that these neighborhoods are primarily intended for residential use, but may also include some supporting retail, office, and institutional uses. That's what we're proposing to fit into these existing buildings. And I would note that we are creating substantial new parking to accommodate those uses. So we have a situation where this does fit. It does meet all your criteria for a special exception, and it also meets your criteria for both a use variance and a validity variance. The primary criteria for a use variance and a validity variance are essentially the same, and that is that you can make no practical use of the property no practical use of the property under the current zoning. That the current zoning list of uses does not allow you an option to use that property at an expense that is not cost prohibitive. That's the criteria. That's what it all comes down to. And if you look at the list of uses, and they've been discussed by Jerry and some of the other witnesses as well, I would just like to go through the various uses that have been discussed. I think Mr. Cognetti provided some excellent testimony about people who might have been interested in certain things, but found that they weren't possible. Now, for example, a golf course. Well, it really isn't big enough. The property, even at 8.5 acres, it really isn't big enough for a typical golf course. Perhaps you could do an executive golf course, but think of the cost of the demolition. The cost of the demolition for the entire property is more like $5 to $6 million. So golf courses are hard enough to make money with without having to spend that kind of money up front. So even if you got the property for free, you're still $5 or $6 million in the hole before you even start building a golf course. That's one example. The group home. One of the things that's been pointed out that several of these uses that are public and highly regulated by health and safety agencies, so to speak, they require an extraordinary amount of investment, and that investment is much more than what would be required to make use of this building in a practical way that would actually save it. And it's by no means a foregone conclusion that you can save these buildings. It's very close. So you've got to have something that is not cost prohibitive. And the group home is just one example. It would be very cost prohibitive to develop it for that, for the reasons Jerry mentioned, but also because the state regulations now encourage you to disperse these things. And I know a little something about this because I was chairman of our hospital in Wayne County for 5 years. I was a member of the board for 12, and I was a member of our nursing home board of directors when we first established it. So I know a little bit about the regulations that apply to all these sorts of uses. And a group home is not going to work because the policies of the state, both from a physical building perspective and from the standpoint of how the home is operated, will not work for it. Medical and dental office. Mr. Cognetti mentioned that. This building is far too big for that. It's not near the hospital, any of the hospitals. And again, the cost for meeting that criteria is just, again, cost prohibitive. We've talked about the golf course, but there's also the cemetery. Somebody had mentioned to him that maybe it could be a cemetery. Again, there are private cemeteries, yes, but who invests $5 to $6 million to tear down the buildings, or even $1.5 million if you just want to take the front, for a cemetery use? Who does that? Nobody does that. The community center and library, he addressed that. There's just simply no market for that here. And again, you have some of these ADA requirements that apply to that. They're going to be very strenuous. The cultural center and museum, same thing. And the building, the whole property is much too big to be utilized for that. And I want to emphasize that this is one property, and it has what appraisers refer to, I'm sure Mr. Cognetti could testify to this as well, has a unity of use. In other words, you can't use the back buildings without having the front building, which was addressed by Jerry. The same applies the other way. Who is going to buy the front building or use the front building, even on a rental basis, if they don't know what's going to happen to the back building? Would you try to put something that you're going to invest millions of dollars into that front building, not knowing what's going to happen to the potential of those back buildings, which are already in a semi-blighted condition? And at daycare centers, it's already been addressed, same thing as with the group homes. And I would point out some of these uses are also nonprofit. So they don't generate, they don't generate a profit. They require going out into the community and raising all kinds of public money, which we can't assume. The hospital, same thing. Membership club, way too big for that. The nursing home, again, I know the nursing home standards. it doesn't even come close, it couldn't come close to meeting the standards. The office of a healthcare institution or college, I would just point out Marywood University is giving this up. They bought it to add, they're now giving it up. Why? Because colleges are facing enormous financial pressure today. They are being faced with pressure from internet schools, from other types of education. You simply don't do it that way anymore. And all small colleges are under enormous financial pressure these days. Place of worship, building, again, it's much too large, it's unsuitable design. The schools, way out of date for the standards. And again, the public and semi-public uses, those are not things that are going to generate any money. Those are things that are going to require a huge public investment that doesn't exist. So for all those things, there are just simply no good prospects for doing them on this property. And that's why, in my opinion, this qualifies as a validity variance because there's nothing provided that allows us to use that. And secondly, as a use variance for the very same reason. So that concludes my presentation.
If I can, I'd ask you to identify, if you're familiar with it, ordinance number 59 of 2011.
Yes, I'm familiar with it.
You've seen that we have asked for a validity variance, is that correct?
Correct.
And with regard to the validity variance, we've asked for a mixed use on a site. In this case, I think you've said it's an antiquated, integrated, it was a former oral school, and there was an attempt for a college.
Correct.
With regard to other mixed-use adaptive uses that have been introduced into the city of Scranton, with regard to the IL zone, can you please describe for the board, or maybe you can take judicial notice of it. I take pride in this particular ordinance. I actually drafted it and offered to the city, and they adopted it. But part of the validity variance that we're asking, that's our third prong, we've asked that you adopt the mixed use, which we're offering on this particular site. Rather than, and he talked about Hertzberg, rather than you have a vertical building, we're all used to the old school buildings, this one goes on a horizontal plane, as they've described it. The brains and everything else, the cafeteria, the $600,000 kitchen that we have, that's out the front, and then it fed into all these other buildings that shared common roadways, common electric, common heat, water, etc. As part of our validity variance request, what we've asked is that you adopt similar types of uses, and that's part of our proposal with regard to that. So with regard to that particular ordinance, you're familiar with it, is that correct?
Yes, I am.
have an objection first to the ordinance.
Sure, go right ahead.
It's industrial light district. This is an institutional light district.
I agree 100%. That's why we're asking that you
How
offer it.
can the zoning board take this into consideration without that being an overreach of city council who makes amendments to the zoning code?
If I may address that point.
Please
What the
do.
law allows you is a validity variance. A validity variance says, I get to ask you to find that your ordinance, and both your council has already found, we live in a city, and the use has changed. What happened, and this is the Scranton Lace building. It was in that particular zone. And I'm very proud of the fact that that's being renovated now with mixed use, and it's probably come up here. I saw within the last year you actually granted something over near the housing portion of it too. And it's good that it gets fostered. As part of the validity challenge that we have, we say to you, yes, you had an antiquated, it took about a city block, where this takes up more than, well, maybe this is about a city block, it'd be about the same size. And we're asking you for those mixed uses, because you've heard the witnesses get up. These are cost prohibitive. I actually did the math that Jerry came out with. Just to renovate for the permitted uses, that he went through, I did the calculation on it of the $90 by the $33,940. It's $3 million. So under the validity variance, or even under the traditional variance, I get to ask you to say, that's cost prohibitive. If we, there was testimony, we could renovate this for a daycare. We could have the only $3 million daycare in the city of Scranton, and that is cost prohibitive. So why it's relevant, and the only reason I ask that is, one, the city saw it, they recognize that mixed uses have to happen. You have to have readaptive uses. That was on a vertical plane. This is on the horizontal plane. So that's what he gets to testify to, and I'd ask for a ruling from the solicitor, but nothing gets more relevant in a validity challenge as to what I'm asking you for, and that's the mixed uses. I've asked for it, it's in my application. I presume he gets to testify on it.
Well, I don't see the difference. You're asking for a variance. Those economic things are all in here. This particular ordinance is for light industrial district.
I agree with you 100%.
I just don't see how that's relevant to the institutional district.
If it was for an institutional district, I wouldn't be sitting in this chair. What I'm saying is the city recognizes, and if you get to it by traditional means, I understand that. I guess I'm bringing it to your attention that within the last 8 years, the city recognizes you have antiquated structures and facilities, and you have to have adaptive reuses for it.
And I think this board knows that, and we're familiar with that ordinance, but that ordinance, in and of itself, does not apply to this particular case.
I would agree to the extent that that's in a different district. I've offered it. I assume that the objection's sustained, and I'd like to just move on with my questions, if that's correct.
That is correct.
Thank you. If I can, Attorney Penatar has very artfully pointed out that with regard to the traditional grounds for a variance, that they would be accommodated by the same objections for the validity variance. Would that be correct?
That's correct.
Yes. And with regard to this particular site, I believe that you've heard it would be from the different experts, and you've testified ad nauseum that it would be cost prohibitive. Is that correct?
Yes.
All righty. Thank you. At this point, if I could just have one moment.
While we're waiting, I have a question for you.
Yes.
On your testimony. Looking at our book, the approval of the special exception falls on about a list of 6 or 7 items. In our book under 118C, and it goes from 1 to number 4, and it goes from A to G. And the one I'm looking at that comes into play here is neighborhood. It will not significantly negatively affect the desirable character of an existing residential neighborhood. My concern is the testimony given here tonight, some of it was regarding the outside venue going to midnight. Do you feel, I'm asking personally, that would not have a negative effect on the neighborhood, the residential area around there?
I do. I think that's rather standard, and I think the fact that the building number 1 is quite elevated above, and it's actually where the activities would take place is behind, and there's landscaping in front and so on and so forth. The parking is behind landscaping. I feel that's a reasonable thing. Obviously, the board can discuss that, and it's your job to figure out the conditions that'll work and see if the applicant will accept them. But to answer your question directly, I feel those are adequate, yes.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear the
I
last.
feel they will not negatively affect the neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
If I can, just with regard to this, you mentioned that this was a building number 1. This was an existing building. It already had a $600,000 kitchen on the first floor and cafeteria area. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
All right, and we're not expanding that footprint, are we?
We're not.
Okay, with regard to the residential that we have on the other floors, there was a residential component in the prior use. Is that correct?
Yes.
And there was an office component on the in the prior use. Is that correct?
Correct.
And are we materially changing that from the prior uses?
Not in my opinion.
I appreciate that. And you were here when the traffic person testified that, and I believe in the morning, we actually have less of a traffic impact than the prior use. Is that correct?
Yes.
So if we had less of a traffic impact, are we negatively affecting the neighborhood with regard to that?
We are not.
Okay, now, you've testified that there's a, with regard to the neighborhood, next door there is another institution, St. Joe's. Are you familiar with that institution?
Yes, somewhat.
All right, and that's a large masonry building, is that
Yes,
correct?
it is. Yes.
All right, are we changing the outside of any of these particular buildings other than the vestibule?
No, it's the outside of the buildings, particularly the ones on the Dunmore side, are what make them attractive and appealing, and hopefully to more than people from Transylvania. They're very unique, and they're very Scrantonish in the sense of the glory that once was Scranton in the late 1800s, and that's not going to change.
Now, with regard to the residences that are proposed on there, there is also a residential component within this neighborhood, isn't there?
Yes.
All righty, would our residents somehow be an affront to a residential area?
No, and I think it's worth pointing out that we want to protect our residents just as the other residents want to be protected. We have the exact same standard. I mean, we can't sell apartments, rent apartments, or however we decide to market them. We can't do that if we're somehow doing so operating the place at a lower standard than what the neighbors want, because we're neighbors. Okay.
Thank you. I have no further questions.
Oh, yeah, sure. Thank you. No worries. Sir, good evening. I just have a couple questions. It's getting late, and you were very knowledgeable. Thank you. I want to follow up on Mr. Gatton's question. He asked about the outdoor concert space. Will that negatively affect the neighborhood? I have the same question with regard to the bar. Don't you think that that's going to adversely affect the character of the residential neighborhood that's been there for decades?
I'm just going to object to the form of the question. We're not putting a bar in. A bar is defined in your ordinance, and a restaurant's defined in your ordinance. We're only putting in a restaurant. So my objection goes to the form of the question. It's for a use that I'm not asking for in this building.
I'd love to rephrase it. Do you think that the restaurant that you're putting in that is going to serve alcohol to its patrons at a bar and at tables and potentially outside is going to negatively affect the character of that residential neighborhood that's been established for decades?
I don't, for the same reason I just mentioned, that we're going to have residents there as well. And also, I mean, I hope that when I go to a wedding, I don't get rowdy. I mean, I drink wine, and I hope I don't get rowdy and annoy the neighborhood. I don't think I do. So I don't, and when you have a six seats at essentially what is a service bar for all practical purposes, is where all the dining is sit-down dining on the inside, and I don't see where that's going to negatively affect the neighborhood.
I just want to clarify, you keep using the term "we." Do you work for Brick Development, or are you an independent consultant, just so I'm clear?
I'm an independent consultant.
Will you be assisting them, though, in the rental of the properties?
I will not.
Okay, you're just speaking in the term "we" in general.
That's correct.
Okay, just so I understand.
I'm glad you raised that.
You do that? Okay, that's fine. Now, we also talked about the noise in the back courtyard, and I think am I correct?
The form of the question, who are we, since we're all looking at we? His, we,
I don't know.
No, it's yours. You said we're all looking at it. I would probably object.
Okay. So in discussing the noise that's in the courtyard in the back, you basically said that people will have to follow the noise ordinances that are set up in the city. Does that, in your answer, insinuate that the residents will then have to call the police if noise goes beyond a certain time?
Well, it depends. I'm not sure how Don, handles it here and those kinds of things, but some ordinances are complaint-driven and some aren't. In my opinion, it's best that when they're not complaint-driven, they're driven by regular inspections. If you have something that is significant occurring in an area, you should be keeping an eye on it. But I'm not sure what the policy here is in Scranton. So.
All right, thank you. And you had also mentioned, we talked about the hours of operation. You spoke about the hours of operation. They're going to be from 11 p.m. to 12 a.m. And again, taking into account, you've seen that neighborhood, you've seen that residential area with families and with children, you don't think that will negatively affect the neighborhood at all, having people coming in and out at midnight?
No, I don't, because again, it's like a wedding activity or an art exhibit or something like that, and most of that activity is probably going to occur before that time, and it's going to be dwindling down. It's not like a bar that's open to 3 a.m. and it's still going crazy at 12. It's an activity that's going to be normally winding down at that point, and I don't see it being that a problem for a neighborhood. And I would also point out what they're trying to achieve here, and I think this is where some of the perhaps misunderstandings come from, or conflict, or whatever, is that the only way this project makes any sense is as a unified whole, where the activities in front, as testified earlier, are the face of the project, and it's an integrated whole. So it operates as a high-quality activity. If you're just running a just running a restaurant or just running a tavern or whatever alone, then perhaps you could have some of those impacts. But here what you're trying to do is you're trying to operate something as a whole, integrated whole, that is going to be high quality enough that people are going to pay good money to live in those apartments. That's the point. You're taking a classic old architectural building on a really beautiful site, and you're trying to turn it into a jewel. And when you're trying to turn it into a jewel that's going to bring you big money, then you can't be doing stuff that doesn't make sense or annoys the neighbors, because your tenants are neighbors as well.
Bill had asked you whether you were changing the prior use associated with the building, and your answer was no, we're not. But that building was never a building that served alcohol before, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Okay, that's all I have, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a couple. All right, you had mentioned that the buildings are very deteriorated at this point. Can you hear me?
Yes, that's better.
Okay. You had mentioned that the buildings are very deteriorated at this point, especially the 1880 buildings.
Yes.
What is your estimated cost of all 9 buildings to rehab them?
Estimated cost of what? I couldn't.
To rehab them to the potential that you had mentioned, that they will work as a gem, that they will work as a jewel. About how much would that cost be?
Well, I think Jerry testified, and again, I'm not a, I always go to an engineer, or I go to the...
If we can, I would have Hillary give you that number.
Go ahead.
Yep.
I just don't think he knows.
That's fine.
Right now, with the current plan, we're approximating a rehabilitation cost between $14 and $15 million for the entire project.
For the
And if I can, they have another question with regard to noise and what your policy would be. What are you going to do?
Right.
Yeah, it was probably important to note that there is going to be a manager on site, a property manager on site. And as I mentioned in my testimony earlier, all of these amenities are going to be operated by us. Therefore, there will be self-policing that goes on. We don't want to disrupt our own residents, let alone neighbors. So we will be abiding by, the applicable noise regulations, because that seems to be a concern through self-policing. We don't want to get into police calls and that sort of thing. We don't want to disrupt the neighbors, and we don't want to disrupt our own residents.
I have a question before you step away. Since the bar seems to be a little bit of a concern here, will the restaurant serve food up until midnight, or would that cut off earlier and just have alcohol served after a certain time?
No, the food will be available as well.
Right up to midnight?
I believe so, yeah. 11:30, midnight, yeah. The kitchen usually closes, in my understanding, kind of 30 minutes before closing of the restaurant.
Okay, thank you.
In regards to the 14 million, I don't know if you want to stay up there, because you had mentioned that this would be cost prohibitive, and I'm just looking at the Globe store as one building is 18 million, and it's in much better condition. How does 14 million work?
The developer, throughout, kind of a 40-year career in bringing these sorts of properties back to life, is very creative and thrifty, and does a lot of research into existing infrastructure and systems, into how the most cost-effective way of bringing things back to code, bringing things back to a place where people are going to want to live. And through our estimations, through experience and speaking with consultants and contractors, that's where the numbers lie currently today.
And do you have any documentation that can help us understand this number?
We have, not here, we have our own.
If I can, only because he can answer. If I can, I would have Jerry, I think he hit on this point, but if he can tell you the cost savings of the proposed uses were, I think, $50 to whatever, $70, as opposed to those of right, where you have to have the stepped up in changing it, where they were 90 to 120. But if you want to, maybe you could answer the attorney's question.
Our cost opinions started out with what it would take to renovate Building 1 to accommodate by right uses as stipulated by the zoning code for INSI. Based on those uses, it's our opinion that the building could be renovated for those uses at a range of $90 to $120 per square foot. So with a total square footage, gross square footage for the Building 1 of about 33,900 square feet, that's equivalent to approximately $4 to $6 million. To renovate Building 1 to accommodate the uses that has been presented, that we're proposing tonight, costs $50 a square foot.
Now, I noticed that a number of these are potential, like there's a second potential restaurant in Dunmore. Does that dollar amount include the restaurant or not the restaurant?
Well, that includes the restaurant. This is to renovate.
Both restaurants, I'm sorry.
We're only talking about Building 1.
Well, I'm talking about the $14 million, because we're looking, he just testified to the project as a whole.
She may have the answer.
Okay. You think so, or is there any documentation to suggest what we know the $14 million covers? Does it cover the additional 6 potential event spaces? Does it cover the additional, yes, you do have documentation that we can?
Just so we have a record.
Dan, I'm gonna interrupt here. Does this testimony have anything to do with before?
Yeah, we're really
zoning?
getting off track.
No, that's fine.
We're
Okay,
way
my
off track right
question
now. It's 10 o'clock at night and we're way off track. Let's stay with the building.
All right, I'll stay with the building. So the front building, so the front building has the possible use to start without the other 2 through 9 buildings, right? That was testified to earlier.
What was the question?
Can the front building, number 1, is it's planned, it's the linchpin, it needs to be set up first, and it will be running before 2 through 9 are finished?
Could you answer that question?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Yes. Will building 1, the restaurant, be used before buildings 2 through 9 are completely finished?
Our plan is to do all the buildings together. Is it possible? Yes, that Building 1 could potentially be finished before the other buildings are finished, yes.
But I thought I heard her agree to earlier that you kind of came to an agreement where you would start some of the other buildings before Building 1, but they weren't in agreeance of that, is that what?
Correct, yeah, we don't have plans to finish Building 1 and then contemplate what we're going to do with the other buildings. There's no economies of scale with the soft costs and bringing labor and site work. That becomes, you start increasing costs if you do one thing at a time, and then you go back and you do another thing at a time, because there's overlap. So it doesn't make any financial sense to do it that way.
Do you have any idea how long that could be? Building 1 might get done, is it a day before the other ones, a week, a month, a year?
I honestly don't know. The timing really depends on approvals and timing and construction and contracting availability and trades, and the list goes on.
That's all I have, thank you.
I have no further witnesses. We're resting. Just as a point, Attorney Penatar, on the point that we can hit their traditional variance ones, Attorney Penatar's point that there is an overlap between the traditional variance and the validity variance. At this time, just with regard to the validity variance, we're going to withdraw that consideration before the board. Yes. That's fine. With regard to our application, we're looking for a special exception. We have also asked for alternative grounds, and they are the traditional variance grounds that are in the MPC as well as in your ordinance. Our third course was a validity variance, which does cover basically the same grounds. That's where I'm asking you to take a look at ordinance number 59, take what I've proposed on there for our particular uses. We're withdrawing just the third leg. That would be the validity variance. We still have our traditional variance and our special exception. One is the special exception, the other one is the alternative grounds for the variance, and to the extent of any overlap for those. Do you understand what I did, Dan, or no?
Absolutely.
All righty. Mary, any question? All right. Any for the board, what I did? Thanks.
We have a lot of loyal people that have been sitting here a long time waiting to public comment. Of course, we'll do that inside what we want to do because the time is getting late.
I mean,
I hate to have them all here and not testify. I don't know what you guys think.
Go ahead, Sean.
No, I was just going to say, if we're going to have them speak, I think they should definitely live pretty close to this project and not be repetitive every time someone comes up. You know what I mean? Like, if we want to speak, let's speak about new issues. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
Mark Seitzinger, 1112 Columbia Street, Scranton, Pennsylvania, 18509. Number one, the noise ordinance, 11 o'clock is the deadline. Montage Mountain has the 11 o'clock ordinance. Nobody can play a song after 11 o'clock at Montage Mountain. Closest house is a mile away. Now, they talked about before about the noise ordinance, the gentleman that was up here before, that it wouldn't affect the neighborhood because of the building in the front. Well, it will affect the people on Evelyn Street and then the other part of Richmond Street. That's not blocked out. There's a wrought iron fence that runs up Evelyn Street, which is wide enough for one car. I'm the president of the Greenridge Neighborhood Association. I'm here for a couple reasons, obviously. I'm the former building code official for the city of Scranton. I'm sorry, Mrs. Newcomb, am I interrupting you?
No, I'm listening to you.
Okay. Thank you. We've been here a long time. I expect the same respect.
Yeah.
I am the former building code official for the city of Scranton, and I know the rules and regulations of the zoning hearing board and how it is to be conducted. First and foremost, I'm asking for this to be continued or dismissed at the point of section 112A, 3, B, and C. As the president of the neighborhood association, I was never notified by hand delivery or written notice. Was never sent to me in the mail either. And that's according to the City of Scranton ordinance, the zoning ordinance of, I believe, whatever year it is. By not giving me that, that's a deprivation of our due process as a neighborhood group. In accordance, in light of all the ongoing stuff that's going on in the City of Scranton, I think it's in the board's interest to follow all rules and procedures and protocols. To continue the case until such time that all protocols and procedures are followed properly. The property we are here for is for the Scranton State School for the Deaf, otherwise known as Marywood South. This institution was a great neighbor and friend to the neighborhood. Over the course of 18 months or more, we learned that Marywood was in a lease to buy deal with Mr. Robbins. I met Mr. Robbins once at Marywood on a Saturday in January of 2018 when Marywood held an information session on the potential project. And I don't mean to digress into something else, but it is all relevant to this case. We were able to ask questions, and when asked about a major factor in Greenridge, which we spoke about before, Meadowbrook, Mr. Robbins didn't know what it was. How do you buy a property and not know what runs through it? Meadowbrook is a creek that runs from Dunmore through the state school and through our neighborhood. It has been a problem for years and continues to this day, even with the temporary fix that was put in place. Many homes have been damaged, over $200,000 worth of damage to one home alone. So to say that this Meadowbrook doesn't affect other people, those properties were on Wyoming Avenue and Ryerson Avenue. Meadowbrook runs right through there. The more water you add to it, the more problems you could end up having. So to say that this isn't relevant and it doesn't run through Scranton, it runs right through the property, starting in Dunmore. The bridge in Dunmore on Jefferson Avenue, I believe it's Jefferson Avenue. Do you know why they're fixing that bridge? Because of the collapse of Meadowbrook in that area. The culvert collapsed. That's why the bridge is being fixed. As a graduate of Marywood University and a former employee of the school, I'm a little disappointed in Marywood for not being forthcoming with the Greenridge community. That is not being a good neighbor. Marywood is a great institution and educates its students with the highest quality of education, but sometimes being a great institution to just your students isn't enough. Marywood bought this property and still holds the bag in all of it. I realize, I'm a former building code official, there is a lot of asbestos in that building. Relative or not, Mr. Robbins stated that they would wrap it and spray it at the first meeting that we had. Other developers have looked at it and told me they wouldn't touch it because it would be too cost prohibitive. So, who is maintaining the property now or for the past several months? Is it Marywood or Brick Investment? On March 27, 2019, I notified both the fire department and the police department of numerous canine police units in the parking lot off of North Washington Avenue. Also in that same general area, there was a fire hydrant that was laying on its side. Of course, the BCO and me kicked in, and I was wondering if there was fire protection in the building that canine units, not just from Scranton, but from all over the place, are using for what I believe was training. According to the police chief, he made phone calls to Marywood, and no one was aware of anyone using the property except maybe architectural students. That was on March 27, 2019. I can tell you, seeing police in the neighborhood is a good thing, and trust me, they were there on numerous occasions. On April 9th, I did a follow-up with both police and fire because I saw the Scranton Police K-9 unit there that morning. Again, as always, my concern is safety. That's my number one concern. The fire department responded back and stated that an inspector would be going out to the property. The assistant chief put the inspector in contact with me, who was on site on or around April 3rd. And the reason why this is relevant is because this comes down to who's maintaining the property. A violation notice was given, and it stated that the fix was immediate, meaning the fire hydrant had to be fixed. I guess the other question that I have here is, though, if they're saying that the properties are in such poor condition, why are they letting anybody in them? Especially police units. They're here to protect us. Why are we putting them in harm's way? Doesn't make much sense to me. So a violation notice was given by the fire department. Who's watching the buildings? If Brick Investment or even Marywood cared about the neighborhood, they would have been all over this. But instead, it took for the neighbors to call it in. Is this what it's going to be like if Brick Investment gets what they are asking for? Sure it does.
Your issues with Marywood until they purchase the property, no?
No, but we don't know because who's maintaining the property?
We don't own it.
Okay.
We got to assume the owner should be maintaining the property.
Don't know if they made an agreement or not. So we have no idea.
We would, without an agreement, we would assume the owner
I understand.
is responsible for the property.
Okay.
We would assume the owner is responsible for the property.
Okay.
This is blighted, it's broken into. I didn't even put of the record. There were the stained glass windows, somebody broke in and stole them. This thing's going downhill fast. That's why we've put this in. It needs to be addressed. Everything he's saying is correct. We need to get in there and we need to fix it.
Just to clear this up,
Yes, sir.
the sale's contingent on zoning approval.
Yes, it is. And without that, you heard Mr. Cognetti had 190 people that did it under their confidentiality. They looked at it, and you heard the testimony, $20 to $30 million to rehab it. They're not coming. This is it.
And he mentioned buildings that were unsafe. So if this is contingent upon zoning approval and it gets denied, the buildings are still going to sit there in the shape that they're in.
How quickly are they
Maybe-
going to fix them if they get it?
Well, same the way that people who have condemned houses, like the gentleman before us, come and fix it. You spend money, you fix it.
I understand the field. I worked in the field for 8 years. I get it. I understand that. My question is, who's maintaining it now?
Well, it's not relevant.
Again-
It's
again-
not
It's
us,
not
so
relevant.
let's
Okay.
move on.
I'll just keep making the phone calls that I have to make because we're the watchdogs for the neighborhood because nobody else is watching
And
it.
I appreciate that.
So
Something
we'll
we're
do
gonna
everybody's
he's
work for them.
protecting.
That's
Thank you.
basically what we're saying is we'll do the work for them. Okay?
I would be contacting Marywood. They're the owner.
I have no problem
But on
making the phone
behalf
calls.
of my client, thank you for your diligence.
I mean, it's not something that, it's not seen, it's right there. It's a main thoroughfare in Greenridge. It's the main area. Every school around there is affected, St. Paul, St. Clair's, Robert Morris, Marywood Daycare. Has anybody been up there for the traffic at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? And I'm just asking, and I respect your study that you did, but has anybody been up there at 3 o'clock during the school year? Any members of the board have ever been up there?
I don't know if it was 3 o'clock, but it's no different than Main Avenue, than Wyoming.
Or in any other school at that time.
Okay, relax. It was just a question. I'm not trying to stir up controversy here. I'm just asking a question.
Sean, I haven't been there.
Okay. Has anybody ever been there at Halloween?
Yes, I've been there on Halloween, but I don't see the
Dan, I'm gonna
relevance of
object.
that
Okay,
either. People trick or
thousands
treat.
of children walking there. My concern is if we add more vehicles, we put more kids in harm's way.
Okay, well, understood.
Is this unsafe because of the way it is now, or once the restaurant, when the
If
bar
more-
comes in?
If more is added, because if more is added, you're going to add more vehicle traffic, you're going to add more pedestrian traffic, you're going to add more people there. If they keep a bar open and people are drinking, what do people do when they drink? Sometimes they get in a vehicle. If they get in a vehicle and they operate a vehicle and they run somebody over, who's responsible?
Yeah, I'm just going to object.
But-
This is speculative.
it's-
There are
It can happen anywhere, too. so.
Yes, if I can, with regard to that, with regard to a special exception and with regard to criteria and traffic cases, speculation has not been allowed. If you have something in particular, I put a traffic engineer, which I'm quite proud of, came from West Scranton, but did well for herself down in Philadelphia. If I'm putting less traffic out in the morning, I'm not causing a problem. These are empty buildings now. Our uses will be less, and where we do have it, when we have it with events, and you made the points, the information was, an hour before and an hour after, and at most we're putting, I think it was a half of a car on there, and we're at 43% of our driveway criteria. I mean, I understand your points, Mark, but it sounds like you're my witness.
There are concerns as a neighborhood group. There are concerns as people who live there. You guys don't live there. I do. I live 5 houses away from this. Some of you don't care, some of you do. I live there. I've lived there my whole entire life. I've seen it every day.
No.
You guys have to base your information on what you get. I understand that. And I respect what you do. But understand where we're coming from as well. That's all we can ask for. That's all I have.
Thank you.
Thank you. You raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
My name is Albert Young. I live at 1713, 1715 Wyoming Avenue in Scranton.
Thank you.
Before I get started, I left a medical procedure in Philadelphia this morning to be here. So, bear with me. Now, I really disagree with some of the statements that have been made here tonight about Meadowbrook Creek not being in the city of Scranton. Okay? I have the engineer's report that the city paid for in my house. If anybody wants to look at them, feel free to contact me. Again, Evelyn Court. The entrance on Evelyn Court was used by maintenance people only when it was the oral school. Very small entrance. Jefferson Avenue, is a one-way street behind the hospital. It's two-way to the cemetery. Now, to the members of the board, the zoning board, and the proposed purchasers, apparently there is no one that is thinking about stormwater drainage but the homeowners in Greenridge area. What I have heard, true or not, to be the fact, removing trees or paving over dirt areas to make room for parking areas, parking spaces, does not cut the cake here. Meadowbrook Creek conduit cannot, and I'm saying that again, Meadowbrook Creek cannot assume any more water than it's handling right now. As it stands, I am the one that Mark talked about losing over $200,000 in value because I'm in litigation against the city because the gross lack of maintenance in this conduit. I was flooded last August with almost 8 feet of water in my basement. I have had to replace 2 furnaces, 2 hot water heaters, 2 electric services, along with a loss of a family room and a business. I no longer can run my business out of this house. Since February, I have received water 4 times. The last time was a week ago. Tonight, I had to call the fire company to pump out the basements and drain the water from my backyard because there was too much water in the conduit. And now we want to put more water in that conduit? I'm sorry. Now, the homeowners on the 17 and 1800 blocks of North Washington Avenue have a problem with drainage from the driveway coming down the main entrance of Building 1. When it rains hard, the curbs on those streets cannot handle the water. It goes over the curbs and into the sidewalks. What drains down into the 1700 block of North Washington Avenue, because there are no curbs there, runs down to the 1700 block of Wyoming Avenue like a river. And now it goes across the street into my backyard, into my cellar. Again, we cannot afford to put more drainage into that system. And I don't care how many drains they put in around that area, around the grounds. Now, again, as I understand it, and it may not be true, but my understanding is the college received a grant to raise that building. Building 1 I'm talking about, nothing else. If they don't want to use the grant to raise that building, then pay it back. Don't use it for something else, or take it off the cost of the purchase price. This back and forth idea that we have has not set well with a lot of area residents, and it's time to put it to a rest. Bottom line, no restaurant, no businesses, no building. And by the way, there were 8 homes that were damaged in that flood of August of 2018. A variance today for a restaurant? Possible. It's possible. Maybe next year they'll want to put a full bar in there. Possible. 3 years from now, they may want to go for a variance for a hotel. Possible. Once you put a variance, this goes on and on and on. And 4 years down the road, it may be closed. Who knows? It's speculation, yes. But again, to put more parking spots in that area, sorry, I don't agree with it, and I would like to see that building raised rather than put the money into it. Marywood owes us a debt by taking care of a blight. It's too bad that that place has to go to rack and ruins the way it is. But I'm sorry, I can't see it. I've had too much water too much damage, and they can't convince me, even into next week, that they're going to put more drains in to carry the water, because we don't have the system in the city to carry the extra water. Paving,
When this was the Scranton School for the Deaf, did you have the same problem with the flooding? Because the creek was there when the Scranton School for the Deaf was there.
oh yes.
Did you have problems with flooding
I've
then?
had problems with Meadowbrook Creek for well over 50 years, on and off.
So this is not a new problem?
This is not a new problem. I have begged the city, I have begged everybody from Washington DC to the council here in the city of Scranton. And I am now trying to get a special meeting with the state representative and the state senator to meet personally to get this thing put on the blocks, because we have DEP in certain areas that are holding the bag.
So would you say that this creek is going to be a problem no matter what's inside of
It's going
the
to be
property?
it's going to be a problem if they don't do it properly, if they don't repair it properly. And it started when they put Route 81 through, and the drains from Route 81 were put into that creek up in Dunmore. And it goes from the silt dam all the way down. Then we had the sanitation department putting in, up in Dunmore, putting leachate through. Did you ever have a garbage truck parked in your living room? I have, because they put leachate through that creek.
Thank you, sir.
And I'm sorry, but thanks for your time.
Yep. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Name and address, please.
My name is Mary Jean Moran. I live at 1317 Woodlawn Street in Dunmore, Pennsylvania. I am the sixth house up from where the exit of the
Dan, are we
development
allowed to
would be.
take testimony from Dunmore?
I'm also a member of the Green Ridge Revitalization Committee.
More than 200 feet away, you'd have to grant.
If it helps at all, I'm also the author of the ordinance, one of the 5 authors
You're on
of the ordinance.
You're on the planning commission too, weren't you?
And I was on the planning commission for 13 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very familiar with this type of project.
Yeah, I mean, the president of the committee, but what do you guys think?
She's planning commission in Dunmore,
No, Scranton.
but she lives in Dunmore.
When she lived in Scranton, she was a member of the planning commission.
Yeah, I understand that. We're talking about where she lives now. Sean said,
In the zoning ordinance on page 1-13, it says the parties to a hearing shall be the city and any person affected by the application who has made timely appearance of record before the board, and representatives of any legitimate civic or community organization, which is why I state I'm a member of the Green Ridge Revitalization Committee also.
If you have some new testimony to give us, please go ahead.
Thank you, sir. I speak to you tonight to request a complete City Planning Commission review of this application. Brick Investment Corporation is asking for a use not equally or less objectionable in external effects compared to the pre-existing old use as a school for the deaf. It is not in compatibility with the character of the surrounding neighborhood, which is R1A single-family homes. When we wrote the ordinance, we were very concerned about the protection of neighborhoods, and it was foremost in our minds at the time, because we lose too many of the upper middle class, single-family home buyers to the suburbs. This change of use will change more of those people away. Before anyone starts thinking, oh, it's just another NIMBY group, I would like to carefully state that the North Washington Avenue, Electric Street, Columbia Street neighborhood is a boon to the city of Scranton. It's full of doctors, lawyers, architects, and business owners. There's a home right now, less than a block away from the oral school, for sale for more than $500,000. What I'm trying to say is that this area is an asset to the city and to the Marywood campus. Why? Because the people who live there pay higher taxes on their homes. They also pay higher wage taxes on their income. This is good for a city. Because it changes and alters the character, Mr. Jones.
Yes,
so
and
much
I have the
so.
right to ask for a foundation. May I have the studies? May I have the assessment cards? May I have
No,
the supposition of it?
Well,
She's testifying
that's where
she
the
feels
planning
that-
commission comes in. That's where the planning commission.
But we already said the planning
We
commission
will
is.
be sending it to the planning commission, but she has the right to say how she feels it affects
Oh,
the neighborhood.
that's true, as long as it's,
What I'm saying really is that Scranton prospers more with an area that attracts higher income earners. We don't want to chase them away. Now, I feel very bad for Marywood that they feel they are saddled with this property, and I will hope they will try to examine selling the property in another way. But the city can't suffer because Marywood made a mistake in purchasing the property. This whole case is not just about changing the use of one building, it's about changing a settled, beautiful, highly valued neighborhood into apartments, restaurants, public event spaces. It alters the character of the neighborhood completely. The granting of this variance, this application, would be a substantial detriment to the public interest and the properties around it. It should be denied. Thank you very much for your consideration and listening to me. Thank you.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Name and address, please.
Eric Ketelabowski, 1729 Ryerson Avenue, Scranton, Pennsylvania, 18509. K-A-D as in dog, L-U-B as in boy, O-W-S-K-I.
Where is Ryerson Avenue?
Ryerson Avenue, thank you for proving that no one knows where the Ryerson Avenue is, because I didn't know where it was, so I bought my house. I've lived in Scranton for 40 years, over 30 of them in West Side, moved to Green Ridge when I bought my house. Ryerson Avenue is just off Delaware Street. One block, Mr. Young's yard is below my yard, basically. Below my front of my house, I mean.
Mr. Chairman, I
That's a
think
little far.
our scope is getting wider and
Yeah, I mean,
wider.
No. This is,
I'm talking right now, all right? Our scope is, we're starting to go farther and farther away from this project. I'm familiar with Ryerson Avenue. My sister used to live on Ryerson Avenue years ago. And I feel that's too far of a distance away to have any standing on this case.
I would like to be heard. My street.
We're not done yet. We're not done yet, all right?
Dan, I know we.
I believe Mr.
yeah, I'm
Kadlubowski.
going to have an objection, too.
Yeah.
This is down the,
This is down the street, and I'm assuming your testimony is going to go to the overflow of Meadowbrook.
My testimony is going to go to the overflow of
Of
that.
Meadowbrook, yeah.
Also, but I
Which
want.
Mr. Young has already
No.
told us.
This is different than Mr. Young's testimony. Mr. Young has had property damage. I have a legitimate concern for my family. Ryerson Avenue, and I have pictures to prove it, is splitting in half because of the culvert, because of the Meadowbrook Creek. It is literally splitting down the middle. There is a retaining wall holding up Ryerson Avenue that is being held up by a condemned garage. There is a 3-foot difference from the top of the wall to the bottom of the wall. It is being held up by a condemned garage in Mr. Young's yard that cannot be pulled down because the wall is going to fall. If the wall falls, Ryerson Avenue is a dead-end street. I'm the last house on it. You cannot get out of Ryerson Avenue. No emergency vehicle could come to Ryerson Avenue. My daughter, who... Please let me speak.
I'm
My daughter,
gonna
who has
interrupt you.
special needs, cannot walk, has to
Just let
take
me-
a bus a block away because of this.
Just let me say something. I don't know if everyone's getting it. This is going to Planning Commission. Like, that testimony, and I know where you live, and I know what you're saying, but this is Planning Commission items. It's not the zoning items. And I'm not trying to dispute your testimony or anything, but it has to go before Planning Commission for all that, for the water runoff and everything. We don't decide. This board doesn't decide anything with that.
But you do decide the variance that gives them the right to pave up to that creek.
No,
which will give more runoff.
that's not in Scranton.
That's not in Scranton.
That's not in
That
Scranton.
parking
The
lot
creek
is not,
is in
that
Scranton.
parking lot is not in Scranton, though, sir. We're
Yeah.
gonna have no variance on that at all.
The
It's not in our scope. All we're looking at tonight, and, I mean, everyone had a lot of latitude here about talking about Dunmore. Our focus, as 5 members, is that building, that section in Scranton.
Okay, so, and this may not, and again, I'm new to this whole process, so I apologize, I'm a little.
No, that's
upset by
fine,
this
that's
whole
fine, but I
scenario
just want
'cause-
an understanding that,
But I just have a legit question. Building 1 is Scranton, buildings 2 through 9 are not. Say there's an event in building 3, and there's, God forbid, a fire or some kind of mayhem or something that breaks out. Whose police department answers that, Dunmore or Scranton's?
I assume Dunmore.
should be Dunmore.
Scranton's.
I don't
Whose
know
fire
that.
department?
I don't know that.
Scranton's.
And I'm sure you people live over there, you know more than that, but I'm just making an assumption, Scranton.
Right, no,
Or
and
Dunmore, I meant to say.
What I'm just trying to say is, this is a Scranton issue, all around, doesn't matter if it's just the one building, it is a Scranton issue. Our resources are what are maintaining that. Dunmore doesn't send their fire department, Dunmore doesn't send their cops, we do. Our neighborhood is the one that watches those properties. I'm the one who had to call someone for Robert Morris because kids were trying to break the fence the other day. I had to call the cops to get that stopped. We're the people that keep that neighborhood alive. I have no issue with making those buildings something. They shouldn't go down. They're beautiful buildings. Well, 7 of them are, or 8 of them are. They're beautiful buildings. There needs to be something in there. And if their plan is good, I don't care. If it works, that's fine. But you cannot just say that part's not Scranton, because part of that, whether that part is in Scranton, it affects Scranton. And that's the problem.
And I understand that, I'm sure the other 4 members do, but our focus is the Scranton building. And I'm sure your attorney will agree with me on that, attorneys agree with me on that. We're not looking at anything else. We can't. We're looking at building 1. And
well,
And the
I have
stormwater.
pictures to submit that are Scranton. This is Scranton
No,
property.
and we understand the stormwater drainage is a problem with Meadowbrook, no question about it. That issue has to be addressed at the planning commission, though, not here. Thank you.
no, thank you very much, Ms. Rice.
Raise your right hand, please. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
My name is Judy Mundy, M-U-N-D-Y. My address is 1900 North Washington Avenue, Scranton. I live directly next door to the property
Thank you.
in question. First, I want to apologize. I'm not a fan of public speaking, so bear with me here. Before I read my statement, I want to go back to something that was said about Evelyn Street earlier, since I live on the corner of North Washington and Evelyn Street. Although not formally, let's say, signed as a one-way street, that street cannot handle two-way traffic, number one. Number two, there is no entrance that can completely go through the property from Evelyn Street. At the corner of Adams and Evelyn Street, what it pulls into there is a small little parking lot. That's it. So that cannot be considered as a viable entrance or exit. Sounded like it. Let me just finish, and then if you want to ask me a question at the end, I'd be more than happy to answer that. But if it was presented as you can get in and out through that entrance, it's not feasible. And not only that, that corner of Adams and Evelyn Street is extremely narrow. That's another area where two cars cannot get through there at the same time. In regards to water runoff, again, I live at the North Washington side. During heavy rains, the water that comes down Evelyn Street now is unbelievable. And if it's a heavy storm at North Washington there, it's going to back up and flood. So if there's further erosion, whatever, and it's not done properly in the back there, there's going to be a lot more water coming down Evelyn Street that I think is going to cause a problem. All that being said, gentlemen and Mrs. Newcomb, I first want to start by emphasizing that I would love nothing more than to see the buildings associated with the old deaf school restored to their original beauty. My sole concern lies with Mr. Robbins, who is the face of urban growth, urban development, whatever the company is called. His urban development history and blatant lack of integrity, and I'm sorry, a simple Google search. I'm sorry, you can ask me a
My
question.
client is not going to be disparaged in this. You've ruled on it one other time. I have a project that's in here. I have a developer with $14 million. He's been named Man of the Year up in Rhode Island and everything else. I've heard about all this urban, whatever, internet.
We have consistently held that the personal background of the developer is not relevant because the developer could change tomorrow. Whether it be a saint developing today could be selling it tomorrow,
Okay.
and a devil developing it today could be selling it tomorrow.
And with all due respect, Miss.
Mhm.
Okay. With all due respect, Attorney Penatar, the person behind this, it is important. Because, and Hillary opened the door earlier, she said he had nothing but this successful career. A simple Google search says otherwise. You can go through and look at, again, simple Google search, 4 different states where he's had issues. I'm sorry, you can ask me a question at the end.
Again, that's not relevant to this issue.
Well, I'm sorry, but I think we're opening.
I have to now cross-examine
Okay.
Google, or something on the
Oh,
internet.
oh,
I
please.
realize everything that's on the internet
I
is
think what
true,
the
but
solicitor is asking you is to move
Okay.
on from that subject, please.
Okay, so let's go in a different direction again. Again, I'll say, as far as the record that he claims to have is not accurate. We won't go into a Google conversation here. That being said, we are opening Pandora's box here as to who develops the property. I will go back to what I said first. I would love nothing more, living next to that property for the last 20 years, to see it developed and restored. Those buildings are absolutely beautiful. I've been inside them. When I was in high school, I worked in the kitchen in the front building. So as far as wanting to see it preserved, something done with it, absolutely. That being said, I find it hard to believe that this is the only developer in the United States who can come in and offer a proposal. What I'm asking is, and I believe it's the moral duty of both Marywood University, and I realize at this point, Dr. Frashone, who I happen to know, is the only person from Marywood's board who took the courtesy to stay here and stay a little bit longer. Sister left, other members left. So to Dr. Frashone, I'd like to thank him. But I would ask that this board, as well as the board at Marywood, take the time and do their own research. Look at the man behind this. You are opening up Pandora's box. There has to be other developers out there.
Regardless of whether there are, we can't vote we can't vote on the basis of a developer. I mean, we can't just say, oh, we're voting no because you guys don't like the developer. We can't vote
Well, I'm
on
gonna
that.
I mean, there's an open area there, but at the same time, I think it's your duty, as well as Marywood's duty, to do more research to a background. You are opening Pandora's box here. Thank you.
Thank you. Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
My name is Joan Voles, V as in victory, O-L-Z as in zebra. My home is 1203 Richmond Street, Scranton, 18509. The 1200 block of Richmond is directly parallel to Evelyn Street. I have lived there for more than 30 years. I was born in Scranton and raised in Greenridge. I have walked past this property for the better part of 55 years. I saw this building, building number 1, be built To the rest of my knowledge, it may have been zoned for residential, but there were never any dorms in that building. The fear as a neighbor that I have are twofold. One is having a restaurant that serves alcohol in the middle of a definitely residential neighborhood with young children, hence young drivers, to have that be open till midnight and licensed to serve alcohol. There are many establishments within walking distance of that property if someone wants to garner the ability to get a drink. The second part that I worry about is the variance, and I may be wrong, but I understand that once the zoning goes through as a multi-use or the variance is created, and that particular facility doesn't succeed, it can be turned around and rezoned. The fear is that it be rezoned to a Section 8, which would deplete property values in Greenridge. We pay a lot of property taxes. I've raised 3 children in that neighborhood. You talked about the traffic, and I'm not going to belabor the point, but I will say that at this point, there is a school bus stop 1 block from the property at the corner of North Washington and Richmond. That is a Scranton school bus stop. There is also heavy traffic that goes to and from St. Clair's. Having raised my children there and they attended the city school, they were not allowed to cross North Washington Avenue to go to school without an adult. It is that busy at this current time. So I am just asking the zoning board to look into the type of zoning that they might be giving, where it could impact in terms of the alcoholic consumption in the area, which I did laugh at some point when they said, oh, it'll die down at 12 o'clock. Having 3 adult children, knowing the Ubers will start to come to the property at 12 o'clock to take them to the next place that's open till 2 a.m. I'm just very cautious, and as a property owner, will be following, because if certain variances are passed, there will be more than one for sale sign on some of those properties. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Raise your right hand, thank you. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
Aaron Maloney, 1032 Columbia Street. I wasn't planning to speak tonight, but I overheard Sister Mary in the back tell a group of people just to go home because it was nonsense. And then I got emotional, right? Like in this emotional thing for the residents. I live right there. I live 353 feet away because I was Googled it because I didn't get a notice. And it's really close. It's very close, so it's very important. We've invested. We just bought the house a year ago. Before that, we lived on the corner of Caphouse and Electric on the other side on the bottom of the block. I just wanted to note that my concerns are, some have mentioned the integrity of the developer, and the integrity of the developer isn't my concern at all, but specifically as it relates to zoning, the concern would be that if the zoning, which currently fits the neighborhood that we invested in and chose to live in, changes, and the developer were to change, which is why we mentioned that the integrity of the current developer isn't of matter, but the zoning would be different, and therefore the types of different uses, while this plan is nice, 3-5 years from now down the line would be a concern to me. And the other concern that I had to note was that during the testimony today, it was entered in that, or very discussed, that the sale of the property, that the zoning need to be changed because of the inability to sell the property in the uses in the current zone, I think. And I apologize because, again, I wasn't planning to speak. I'm in sales, and I know that when we moved 6 years ago onto the corner of Electric and Caphouse, every day I drove by the former School of the Deaf, and it was beautiful. It was just stunning, like all lit up, all well-maintained, the landscaping. And then after a short period of time, I assume, well, whatever, it doesn't matter what I assume, light by light went out. And then I was like, what's going on? I asked my family, what's going on with the big corner at the top of our block? And then like a week later, the for sale sign went up. And I just, like, knowing the basics of sales, I just think today we talked about the different uses. There are many other factors that can contribute to the inability of a sale of a product and or property, and certainly upkeep and care as an observation of a neighbor. That's all I wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes.
Name and address, please.
I own a property, 1020 Electric Street, Scranton. Normally, when I'm asked to testify, they also ask if I have any medical conditions that would impair me from doing this.
I'm sorry, did you give your name?
John Foley.
I didn't hear him.
And if I don't get out of here shortly, I'm going to have a diabetic episode. So I'm going to hopefully make this brief. Maybe I can clarify some of the things that were said tonight. Hopefully it'll be helpful to you. John Cognetti, super guy, used to be a neighbor. He said that there were a number of organizations that walked away from the project because it was not financially feasible. Healthcare institutions, hospitals, nursing homes, personal care facilities. All they did, it was a beauty contest. They went in to take a look at it. They would have never, ever considered doing it. And I say that from the background because at one time I represented every single major healthcare organization in northeastern Pennsylvania. And those that I didn't represent, I was asked to audit. Some people might say investigate, but I prefer to use the word audit. They would have never done it. So they're right. Who in their right mind would ever try to use that space for that? That doesn't mean somebody might not use that space, but use that space for a different reason. I'll get to that at the end. I didn't always live in Greenridge. I lived in Nativity, 500 block. After college, I went to New York. When I came back, we had an apartment, the corner of River Street and South Webster Avenue. We couldn't wait to get away from the place. My wife hated it. She hated the location. So we moved as far away in Nativity as we could. And then, for another issue, we wound up moving to Greenridge 30-some years ago. My wife would have the exact date. We enjoyed Greenridge, but that was not the first choice. We looked at other places in South Scranton. We looked at the Hills section. We looked in Dunmore. We looked in Clark Summit. We settled on Greenridge primarily because, it'll become apparent later, because there wasn't a bar, there wasn't a restaurant where we bought our house in the 10 of Electric Street. It was McMullen's, of course, but that was far enough away, not in a residential area. Andy Gavin's, well, across the street from the prison, not a desirable area to live in. But we selected that area because of our prior experiences. All the other places, we had a problem. So, that brings me to where we are today. I sit back and I say, all right, I hear that there's going to be a bar. Mostly a restaurant, but a bar. I hear there's a certain number of stools. Well, I have some familiarity with bars. I have a familiarity because there was a bar right across the street from us at the corner of River Street and South Webster Avenue. It was the Dugout. I couldn't wait to get away from the place. Well, almost. Several years later, I bought the place. Yeah, I did. Stupid. Go ahead. Just reinforce everything my wife has said about me. I am stupid. I didn't realize when I bought the bar that it was different. We didn't have that many stools. But for those who have frequented the dugout, the stools aren't where people participate. It's how many people stand behind, sometimes 2 and 3 deep. I'm also the treasurer of the Scranton Club. Some of the people here might have gone to the Scranton Club before they destroyed the bar that was there. It wasn't the number of stools. It was the people who were standing. So you can't really go by stools. But the dugout gave me a lesson that I thought that I understood, but not really, when I just lived across the street from the dugout. I got the phone calls. I didn't get the phone calls from the neighbors that were in the immediate area, 200 feet. I got calls from people who were a couple of blocks away. They didn't like the noise. They didn't like the traffic. I wasn't just getting those calls for the guys that were there at 4 o'clock in the morning, and yes, we stayed open after hours. I wasn't just getting calls from the people who were complaining about the noise at midnight, nor that the noise and the traffic at 9 o'clock at night. I was getting phone calls virtually all day long. I hated myself. That was 2 of us. My wife hated me for it too. I don't believe that unless you have been through an experience like that, owning a bar and operating a bar in a residential area, can you fully appreciate the disruption within the neighborhood. Unless you do, and maybe some have. But maybe you have had occasion to go to the dugout. I am against this project. Make no mistake about it. I got a problem with the noise issue. Yes, there will be noise. I don't care what anybody says. If they've owned a bar in a residential area, I'd be more than happy to talk to them. Not my experience. The traffic piece of it, I apologize. I've come unprepared tonight. Normally, I'm very prepared. I'm unprepared because I've been involved in a project for the last 5 years that in the near term, phase 1 is going to come to a conclusion. So I'll have time now. I'll have time to look at all of the other documents that would have prepared, including traffic. Because the financial feasibility studies I had to do for hospitals, I had to look at not just the financing piece of it, I had to look at the demand piece of it, I had to look at, traffic studies too. I represented Wayne Memorial Hospital, a gentleman who was here earlier tonight. He was on the board of Wayne Memorial Hospital. I was there when Wayne Memorial Hospital, they were going to put it outside of town. And everything worked, including the demand study and the feasibility study. The one thing that didn't work was Harry Probst. One guy. He changed the entire project. It would have been a lot more feasible. But I'm all familiar with that stuff. So hopefully after tonight, one or more people will provide me with all the documents so the next time, here housing, that I can be more prepared to address any concern. And frankly, from what I've heard tonight, I do have some concerns on all of that. But I will not give them to you because I am not informed to do it. I am urging you not to approve this project. Noise alone. With that, gentlemen, thank you for your patience. You are more patient than I could ever be. If I was in your position, I would have hung myself already. With that, I have to go home.
Mr. Foley, Mr. Foley, before you go, we were glad when you moved out of South Scranton.
Well, if the lady who had the property next to us, had she not rented it to a young couple that was selling drugs, we might still be living there today. But my wife made an executive decision. I don't make those decisions, only she makes them. Have a great evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Oh, anybody have any questions?
Just enjoyed it.
Good evening.
Would you please raise your right hand? Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address, please.
Laura Augustini, 1110 Grandview Street in Scranton. Agostini. First, I would like to enter into evidence these two flash drives that show Ryerson Court and show that it's splitting. It's video that was taken, I believe, today that show what the effects of...
We can't take them.
Okay. I'm actually probably one of the most unpopular people here because...
Excuse me, I just want to object to you not taking the evidence, so it's on the record. You can continue.
Okay.
If she has something to view it, I'd like to see the evidence. But what does it show? A crack in the street? Is that it, ma'am?
I believe this demonstrates the condition of Ryerson Avenue and the fact that it is being paved to cover up the cracks in Ryerson
We have no
Avenue.
way of viewing that evidence.
No, we don't, but I'd
have no way of-
stipulate that wherever this Ryerson Avenue has a crack and they're paving it.
Right, this
I don't mind
again, this again deals with the runoff from Meadowbrook.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's the only reason, we have no way of seeing
Got it. I'm going to move on.
I'd stipulate that's what it shows. It's downstream.
I was in favor of this development. I purposefully joined the Green Ridge Revitalization Committee to make sure that there was a voice in favor of the development on the committee. I listened to some of the criticism of the development and of Mr. Robbins, and I kind of took it with a grain of salt. We all know that developers have good times and bad times, so I was kind of like, let's give them a chance. I really want to see this happen. I thought this was a great project. Then I was at the last zoning board meeting when we were encouraged to meet with Mr. Robbins and his and the people who work with him to try to come to a compromise so that we could talk about this and that each side could bring their concerns to each other and maybe figure this out as the zoning board had advised. I was actually pretty encouraged after our meeting because we spent several hours kind of hashing things out. I thought that we had come to an agreement. In fact, Attorney Pat Lavelle, who was representing USG at the time, and Attorney Dempsey put together a stipulation that we thought kind of addressed both sides. It addressed our concerns regarding the time. It addressed our concerns regarding traffic. It addressed our concerns regarding the completion of the project. So we thought this was great. Then Attorney Lavelle was no longer representing them. And we received an email stating that the stipulation was no longer valid. We were told that, we were given a new stipulation which had a poison pill in it that said, the Green Ridge Revitalization Committee agrees to cease and desist objection and opposition efforts to USG's plans and intentions for the former Scranton State School for the Deaf, commonly referred to as having an address of 1800 North Washington Avenue. So they were asking the 6 of us to speak for the entire Green Ridge neighborhood. And while we might think that we do, we really don't. And there are many more concerns. There are a lot of other concerns that other people have that are to be addressed by other boards. The Planning Commission, the Liquor Control Board, and other places that right now we're not allowed to talk about. I just want to make sure that you're aware that we did try to work with Mr. Robbins, that we tried to come to a consensus and bring a stipulation to, I think it was supposed to be at the November zoning board meeting. And on November 12th, and maybe November 5th, I apologize, I was looking at a couple of emails. We got this email that said, nope, we don't agree to them anymore. And then I saw the new plan, which disregarded everything we talked about. So that's my concern. I wanted this project. I don't know that any of us can trust that this project, as it is being told to us today, is going to be completed, is going to be followed through on by urban smart growth, brick investments, or Lance Robbins. Thank you.
All right. Good evening. My name is Timothy Doherty, and I want to thank all of you for your patience this evening. Mr. Palmtesta, Ms. Nuka, Mr. Walsh, Mr. Marks, Mr. Gaines.
He's an attorney.
Do I need to be sworn in?
You're okay.
Yes, ma'am. Well, I want to thank you, Mr. Nuka. I'll hold truth in a minute. Granted, this is one of the few times I actually I do testify. But more importantly, I want to thank all of you for your patience tonight. Whatever decision you make is your decision, and it's based on the input that we provide you. So what I like to be is humble and quick, because it's been a long night for all of you to sit here and listen patiently to all of the testimony, the information, not only from Mr. Robbins, but more importantly from Ms. Dempsey and Ms. Maloney. What I wanted to say was to recognize Attorney Penatar, Attorney Dempsey, Maloney, as well as Attorney Jones. But my name is Timothy Doherty, as I said. I was born and raised on Washington Avenue. I've lived there for 62 years. My father bought our house in 1926, and he and my mother raised 11 children. 6 of us still live in the area. We live in the 17, 16, and 1900 blocks of Washington Avenue. You all know, and have heard the testimony, it's a quiet neighborhood, a great place to raise a family. But it's changed like everything else has over the years. So what I wanted to tell you was, I not only bring the background of growing up on Washington Avenue, you've heard all that already, but what I wanted to provide you was, more importantly, my background as a career criminal prosecutor. I was fortunate enough to be a member of the Scranton Police Department, and I was grateful to serve on it for 11 years. I started in 1978, I finished in 1991. I had the pleasure of working every section of the city: South Side, West Side, Trip Park, Bellevue, the Notch, downtown, and most of my colleagues at that time had to be born and raised in Scranton. All of them were very proud. But I got an exposure outside of Greenwich that I never forgot. It was extremely grateful to have. And one of them was working as a cop, starting out walking a beat, and then working a radio car, the paddy wagon, and eventually working my way up to a shift commander, until which time I decided to go to law school. After that, I went to law school and I became a career criminal prosecutor. I prosecuted with the Luzerne County DA's office for 10 years, starting out DUIs, working arsons, and having a concentration on nuisance bars. I then left and I work for the State Attorney General. I'm here tonight not as someone who's employed by the Attorney General, and I don't reflect their views. But the reviews I do reflect are those of a career prosecutor, 40 years in law enforcement, 40 years being exposed to what a lot of us don't want to see and don't care to see. But I've had the pleasure of knowing what the effect of some bars, not all bars, but some bars have on the general welfare of the community, starting with the traffic congestion. Now, the Washington Avenue and that section of Greenwich, it goes from Washington, Wyoming, through Dunmore, Columbia, Richmond, everywhere. There's a lot of families, just like South Side, just like West Side, just like Bellevue, just like the St. Anne section of South Side, West Side. We have children, they darting in and out. You have schools, you have St. Clair's, St. Paul's, you have the St. Joseph's and Marywood. It's a lot of traffic coming in and out. The amount of people going from building number 1 could very well increase the traffic flow. could very well increase the danger to children running in and out of the cars. It could. That's your decision. You've been buried with more information than I've had in some homicide cases. So, I mean, you really have, in a short amount of time. So I commend you for it. But I've also know when you introduce a bar into a neighborhood and you introduce it, it does have the potential of creating problems. Because we all know, and just step back a minute, we've all been raised in areas and have frequented areas where there are bars, for instance, existing bars. And some of those bars cause problems. And they've caused problems in our very own community, some of which, Rocky's Bar in downtown Scranton. It's been there a long time, and slowly it started out small and gotten worse and worse and worse, till eventually the district attorney under Mark Powell's leadership have filed a nuisance action and closed it. We've had shootings, muggings, homicides. Step to another section of the city, the Castle Restaurant, which is a BYOB, but it started out small and it got worse and worse and worse until eventually you had a homicide where the DA's office stepped in and again had to close it. Let's go to Southside. When I was in the Attorney General's office in 2011, we had a wiretap in Southside going on. That wiretap affected a bar called the Sun Hotel, which was nothing more but a complete cesspool of crime, gambling, drug dealing, fights, and whatnot. Now, I'm not saying every bar is, and I don't want to bring it to your attention that this bar is, because we don't even know if the bar is even going to exist. My purpose here tonight is just to share the information with you of what the potential of introducing a bar into a neighborhood. Because we all know what the effects are of existing bars have. It could very well turn out to be a very nice place. It could very well turn out to be the type of cafe that everyone wants to go to late at night in that type of neighborhood. It could very well turn out to be something nice. And on the flip side, it could eventually become a small problem that gets bigger and worse, where we saw with the Castle, where we saw with Rocky's, where we saw with Bigsy's Bar on West Side, where we had the unfortunate shooting of a well-known Scrantonian about a year and a half ago. You yourselves make that decision. You yourselves judge the information and the credibility of it all. I just wanted to bring your attention and share to you what I've learned and fortunate enough to learn in the past 40 years of being a cop and a prosecutor. So with that, I want to thank you for a very long night, and thank you very much.
Please raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
I do.
Name and address.
Adam Jafrida. It's 1115 Electric Street, Scranton, Pennsylvania. I reside at 1115 Electric Street, and I'm also redeveloping 1120 Columbia Street, which is right across the street from the property. I just wanted to make it short and sweet tonight. You know, it's been a long night. Basically, I think everyone has said quite a bit of issues that everyone's concerned with. I am not in favor of the project, mainly because of the restaurant bar aspect of it, where I think a lot of us are very concerned about that. There's too many ifs, ands, or buts. And as a developer, a small developer, I think that there's the issue with a bar and a restaurant being the only use for that building, number one. I think is nonsense. I think there's plenty of opportunities out there. There's definitely better uses that would make the neighborhood much better, much happier, and it would be a much better negotiation tactic for the developer to use. That's all I have for you guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Because we already stated at the beginning of the meeting that we're going to hold off on any decision until after the Planning Commission reviews everything, we will leave the record open until the next. Okay.
First, because we've all referenced the previous hearing, the previous testimony, the previous memos, the previous evidentiary support,
I'd like that omitted as background referred to by all parties.
Yeah, and I'm going to object. I wasn't at that one. I couldn't cross-examine anybody, and nothing to do with me. But
At the same time, Hillary mentioned it, the board has mentioned it.
When did I mention what? You mentioned that you read it here.
Not necessarily as evidence.
Yeah, the answer is no.
Repeat what you're asking for again?
You got to speak into the microphone because we can't hear you.
I can't hear you.
Okay, so I'm asking for the transcripts of the testimony, the memos, and the evidentiary support that we provided in the first hearing to be limited as evidence toward the background that everybody's been referencing. If this were to go on appeal, people would be asking, judges, other people, other attorneys might be asking, what are they referencing? This makes no sense. So limited to the purposes of understanding the background, that previous testimony, memos, and evidentiary support should be omitted.
Mr. Jones?
No. We were asked to even withdraw that by the board. Now, all of a sudden, we're going to come back with testimony on it? Absolutely not. Category, you ruled the last time I was here that they couldn't bring a transcript from somewhere else. I think it was in a Southside project. That's not how it goes. I get to go to the hearing. I get to represent my client. I get to cross-examine witnesses.
Yeah, since this is a new application, I'm going to deny that request.
Second, we'd like omitted into the record the memo that we drafted for today that we're going to argue on. We'll, what's that? Yeah, and my understanding.
May we have 14 days to supplement the brief and submit it? Is that okay, or would you like it tonight?
No, because I'm leaving it open, so you can supplement anything.
That way we don't have two separate ones.
So there's no two separate
Long
ones.
as,
Yeah.
and Mr. Jones has a chance to respond to whatever's in there.
Sure.
Yeah, if I can, I'd just like to move my exhibits into the record. I would ask that the record be closed. We've actually talked about it, whether we want to do a closing argument at your next one, or whatever.
I prefer to wait, so this way you have in front of you the decision from the Planning Commission, as well as we have in front of us the decision from the Planning Commission, or recommendations from the Planning Commission. I should categorize it as. So rather than closing now and then having to address that later, let's just address it all at the next hearing.
Mr. Pinatar, we're going to, as far as testimony is concerned, we are finished tonight with testimony.
We are finished up to the Planning Commission's recommendation. We will allow them to argue one way or another on the Planning Commission's recommendation.
Are we going to take any more testimony from the public?
No. If I can, I would ask that you vote tonight and you modify it with regard to that testimony.
No, we're not going to vote tonight.
I think we all need time to
we already decided that.
soak some stuff in that we heard.
Agree to wait on the
If-
planning commission?
Yes.
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 All right, we're waiting on the planning commission.
I appreciate that, thank you.
Dan, the only other thing is I sent that June 10th letter. Is that a part of the record? I asked that you made it a part. If not, I'd like to submit that, Bill.
Yeah,
Oh, I haven't read it,
I
so
think
I'm
that
not
you have
admitting
a
to
copy.
anything. I'm going to sit here and read a letter.
Well, that was like what we did with the traffic study and
you
everything
might want
else.
to give me.
Yeah, so
Yeah, that's, I think I have it on my email. I didn't print it out, but maybe just to be certain.
Is it Hillary? Is that your, I know you guys met in the past. Is there any chance before this comes back to us again that you guys could possibly sit down again and try to?
We would be open to it.
What was that?
We would be open to it.
I think the consensus is the bar.
Let's let her answer.
Yeah.
Mary.
I don't think it was properly addressed by the GRC that had things that they were requesting of us that we just literally cannot agree to. We will not be able to get financing, and they're asking to supersede all governmental authority in the planning and entitlement and zoning process. Those to us are absolute non-negotiable. We can't budge on that. So if they're willing to budge and basically eliminate those, oh, sorry.
We're always willing to discuss.
We're going to have to swear him in.
Are we doing this, Dan? Are we able to fit this in, or?
I don't need, I'm just expecting an opinion, not taking testimony.
Hang on.
Who are you?
I'm Lance Robbins.
You're the developer.
We're always willing to...
Before you speak, we're gonna,
Okay.
are we
I
gonna
can
swear
skip
him in,
this
Dan?
We're not having him sworn in, he's not a witness, he's just gonna
offer you.
We still have to swear him in,
Let's get
though.
him, let's swear him and get him on the record.
Let's still have to swear him in.
Okay, advice of counsel.
What was that now?
I will offer him that he'll sit down, he'll meet with him, he would gladly like to do that. You're swearing him in, that makes him a witness to the proceeding, and I'm not having that because I went through all the character assassination. I'm not opening up to any of that. He'll make a representation that he will gladly meet, and he will leave with them whenever it is.
Well, I would urge you guys to try to come together on possibly some kind of agreement. I don't think everybody's 100% against this project, and it would be nice to see you guys come together with some kind of plan for the next time.
We tried, and we will.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you very much to
All right.
both parties.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.